All right. It is my great pleasure and privilege to welcome today Dr. Scot Danforth, who is professor and assistant dean of research at Chapman University. He received his BA from the College of William and Mary, his Master of Education from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and his PhD from the University of South Florida. Dr. Danforth is a well known scholar working in the fields of disability studies in education and inclusive education. He's the author or editor of more than 90 publications, including 13 books, the latest of which we're going to hear about today. His scholarship examines political and ethical issues involving disabled young people and schooling. His goal is to foster the development of democratic schools and communities that are accepting, supportive, and caring to all persons. Professor Danforth is appointed to the faculty of the PhD in Education program at Chapman University and also contributes to the teaching of disability studies courses in the undergraduate program. And we've just added a disability studies minor here at Cal State San Bernardino.
Good move.
Yeah, some of my colleagues can talk about that. Professor Danforth's scholarship is inter and multidisciplinary, engaging the disciplines of philosophy, history, sociology, anthropology, and education. His publications reach a wide variety of audiences, including public school teachers, parents, policymakers, and researchers in numerous fields of study. He was co-founder of the Disability Studies and Education Special Interest Group of the AERA, the American Education Research Association. He is the co-editor of two book series with Peter Lang, Publishing Disability Studies in Education and Inclusive Education and Teacher Education. For 6 years, he served as co-editor of Disability Studies Quarterly, the official journal of the Society of Disability Studies. He received the Senior Scholar Award at the 2014 Second City Disability Studies and Education Conference. Prior to becoming a university researcher and instructor, Professor Danforth was a special education teacher for 6 years in Virginia, North Carolina, and Florida. The book under discussion today is An Independent Man, Ed Roberts and the Fight for Disability Rights from the University of California Press. Of the book, a review published in Mother Jones magazine noted, I knew of Roberts' accomplishments, but not so much the details of his struggles, both around adjusting to becoming disabled and in the fight to launch his centers across California and eventually the country. Chapman University disability scholar Scot Danforth's new book, An Independent Man, Ed Roberts and the Fight for Disability, covers just that. Please join me in giving a virtual welcome to Dr. Danforth. Scot Danforth, thank you so much for joining us today.
You. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for that kind introduction. When you realize you got a Senior Scholar Award over a decade ago, you start, it makes you wonder. Okay, happy to be here with you. I'll just say a few words and then we'll jump into conversation. I don't want to talk for too long. I did choose three very, very briefly, three quick topics, tidbits to kind of tell you about the book and the process. The first I know I've people tend to ask why. Why a biography of Ed Roberts? Originally, I was very interested in, I was just concerned that there was a lack of scholarship about the disability rights movement, about how we arrived at a place with the Americans with Disabilities Act, with curb cuts, with various accommodations, and now later, as after I've written the book, where so much of that is being attacked, which has surprised me and saddened me. But at the time, I just thought, we don't have enough good scholarship on the movement itself and on the leaders, people like Judy Heumann, which, if you're not aware, there's actually a Hollywood movie that's going to come out on the life of Judy Heumann. Hopefully, they do a good job. Ed Roberts, um, Justin Dart, real fascinating people, incredible stories. We tend to not pay attention to these people. The second thing I'll bring up is the book itself. There's a real question of the style, the the way I've written it, because I've tried intentionally to write it so it satisfies both the academics, the historians, in terms of the rigor of the research, and to make it so it's accessible to the lay public. And this is because in doing this research, I interviewed dozens of people. Ed Roberts' family and friends and colleagues, activists, many disabled people who are now getting to be quite old, who are involved in the movement. And early on, one of the interviewees said to me, "Will I can I read this book?" That was the expression. And I knew what they meant. They wanted to know, is this going to be written in a way that I can read it? I'm not a historian. So I didn't want to write the historian only book. Of course, the problem with writing a book for two very different audiences is you may not satisfy either. Um, but I've been supported by the folks at the University of California Press. I think that academic historians will find that it stands up to standards in terms of the quality of the research. Um, it's probably lighter on analysis than a lot of historical work and heavy on narrative. And that's on purpose, that's intentional to try to make it. So I'll tell you I gave the first chapter to my wife, a rough draft, and she read it and she just, she just shook her head. And she said, "No, I wouldn't read this." I had to redo it. I had to redo it. And that told me I wasn't hitting the mark. So I think I've heard from the disability community. I wanted to make sure folks with disabilities could read this book. I've been hearing back from people and they're happy and they feel good about the stories and the accessibility linguistically. The last thing I'll bring up, I found there was a real challenge, and this is, I think, a challenge to anyone who writes a biography, of providing historical context that surrounds, that embeds, in which we embed the narrative of one man. And actually, this, I will tell you, the story is not just about Ed Roberts. I write his biography while also telling many stories about the movement, using him as a vehicle to get to those stories. But I needed context because you can't just tell everything that's going on in the United States, through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the politics, the economics, the cultural background. You can't. So what do you choose? And I had tremendous, hand-wringing over what do I tell about? And then I realized I'm going to tell the story and then embed it in two other movements, the LGBTQ movement and the women's rights movement. And basically, my understanding and my view is that the three of these ran sort of parallel historically and were similar ideologically and in their strategies. And all of them harken back to the grand narrative of, post World War II movements to the African American civil rights movement. And there are direct links between all these movements. And especially since this story has so much about the birth in Berkeley and the birth of the American Disability Rights and movement in Berkeley, California. And so to bring all that together in Berkeley and then to go outward, it just was my way of trying to give some historical ground to the figure of Ed Roberts. And as I did it, it felt right. And people have actually commented, "Oh, I think that worked." I hope that when you read the book, you find it worked. Um, that was one of my biggest challenges. Um, so I would not write a 1,200 page book. I tried to keep it at a readable length. All right, I'm happy to be here. That's my brief introduction. Where shall we go from here?
That's great. Well, Scott, I actually had your note of time and your own place in your career, and sort of leading off with thinking about generations and speaking across generations from that moment of the radical, not just the moment, but the place and the moment of the late 1960s in Berkeley, and that moment out of which Ed Roberts, I think, emerged into public consciousness and his advocacy. I was going to actually end with this, but I think you led with it, so I think it's good to get right into this question of time and our current political moment, but also our current cultural moment in which we see political leaders, um, I think, articulating a kind of um, I want to say callousness to ideas about inclusion, but I think it's something more. I think there's something more reactionary there, and this is, I think, something that in many ways I think our current president is sort of a creature of the 1980s, which was a period of sort of cultural reaction, um, and he's sort of carried that torch, and in some respects, his sort of hangers-on have learned that that's the tune that they need to sing as well. Um, and I'm wondering what in your work on this book, what a figure like Roberts, this sort of titanic figure within the cultural movement, and others like Judy Heumann, um, can tell us still today in our current moment, about these struggles, about these activist movements, struggles for inclusion and full recognition of humanity. I was wondering if that was part of the backdrop to your research and writing of this.
Certainly, definitely. I think for Ed, who grew up in the Bay Area in the 50s, went off to Cal in 1962. He shows up on campus in a very quiet town that was not disruptive, that was not full of what was about to explode very soon after. Um, I think they learned, he and his friends, because he had a group of disabled students who were very lucky, although it's odd to say this, they were housed in a hospital on campus. They were not thrilled to be housed in a hospital, but they learned about working together and about sharing the mission. And so they realized that when you work together, and I still think this is an amazing lesson for us, when you if you work together and you're willing to fight. I mean, time and again, what Ed Roberts learned from high school on, there's a moment in his high school career where he finishes high school and essentially the school district says they're not going to give him a diploma. And he and his mother's own had just died about a year ago at, I think, 105. They essentially had to learn how to fight, how to do this kind of fighting, which is a social, purposeful fighting, and how to do it with your friends as a team. Um, they were also, as the years went on, and Judy Heumann was very pivotal in this by the mid 70s. They're really attempting to bring together people with different kinds of disabilities. So even though if you look at the history of the disability rights movement, it tends to be folks in the early days with physical disabilities who used wheelchairs, often people who had polio or who had spinal cord injuries, that they reached out and they wanted to bring in all these kind of disparate groups, um, blind people, deaf people, people with a variety of disabilities, and create a unity, a solidarity, because we have a shared mission. And then you fight. And one of the things that's interesting that I learned from Ed, and I think this is about the position he was in. You fight, you lose, you wake up the next morning, you're ready to fight again. Now, if you win on Thursday, you still wake up on Friday morning ready to fight again. There is no choice. There's no decision to be made. It's not like sports where the season is over. You win or lose, you may cry, you may laugh, you get up and you go on to the next. And that is, I think it's a lesson even for today. I mean, with the greatest optimism, I hope that this rise of the far, far right is something that is temporary, and that by having people continue to show up to fight, if there's anything that's beautiful about what these fools in Washington are doing, it's the fact that they're fools. They're not very competent. They're not very capable. I mean, that's I'm really looking for a silver lining here. They're not competent in what they do.
Right.
So competent, smart, caring people working together. Um, in the end, the faith is that you'll win.
And I've heard that. I think it was George Saunders in an interview said something similar about the incompetence and that it being a sort of ray of hope. That these are breathtakingly incompetent people. In not every one of them in every way.
Not everyone. Yeah.
I wouldn't say Russell Vaught is incompetent. He knows exactly what he's doing. But some of these folks are sort of um, yeah, pretty breathtaking in their incompetence, and there is some hope in that. Although there's concern about the sort of destructiveness. But um, I think that is a really exciting idea. The idea of solidarity, inclusion, community, and the fight. Um, and I think we can get that and get inspired by that. And I hope our students. Speaking of the book, I'm going to have some copies coming soon. And as soon as they do, students know where to find me by email. So I'm going to have some copies to share and to share that message. Um, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the independent living movement, and uh, what kind of activism, what kind of radical message came from that independent living movement, and this idea of independence. What was being articulated there and advocated for.
Even as early as the 50s, the field of vocational rehabilitation, the professionals who were the leading service providers for adults, had a notion of independent living. Now, their early concept was pretty mild. It essentially was about helping people develop the skills to take care of themselves, to bathe, to feed themselves, to manage their daily life. They didn't have high hopes for that, but the idea was that somebody could be more self-reliant. But it was very much limited to what you could do on your own. And the big shift that happened with the independent living movement with the Center for Independent Living in Berkeley and Ed Roberts and the entire team, people like Hale Zukas, um, was to say that independence is about agency. Independence is about being the captain of your ship. It's about making the important decisions of your life and being in control, even if you physically require assistance to get out of bed in the morning, to bathe yourself, to feed yourself, to get yourself together. And part of the case they were making is that we have some very, very talented. Remember, this was coming out of in Berkeley. These were people who were at the university as students. Many of them were graduate students, and then they came out into the community, a highly talented group of people. And if you told them they had to take care of basic self-care needs, it would take them half the day and they would never get to work. So why not provide some assistance for someone, which the state of California had programs to provide personal attendance that a lot of states did not have. Um, then they could actually do all sorts of things because they're not wasting their time on these daily care tasks. So it was really about what can you do with appropriate assistance that became the shift, and how can we put folks with any kind of a disability. In fact, if you go into in California, the regional center system, which is the state service providers for people with intellectual disabilities, they practice something called person-centered planning, which is how can even people who have intellectual disabilities, who someone might say, oh, well, they can't, make decisions about their life, and yet the whole system is set up to try, I'm not saying it does it well, to try to allow people to make the important choices in their life. Where do you want to live? Who do you want to spend your time with? What do you want to be doing? School, employment, recreation. Um, It's in a way, it's the opposite of the institution. If you think of institutional life, where your entire schedule and your bodily autonomy is handed over to the place and to the people there, this concept of independent living that they developed was the opposite. What if we can be in charge and we can set up systems that allow us to be in charge of our lives? And it's still the goal today. I mean, it
Mhm.
hasn't gone away. It's still the goal. And that movement, one of the great things with Ed Roberts, and he traveled the world. I mean, he spoke all over the world. Um, and he brought this, and so there are independent living centers, and these centers are not places where someone lives. They're self-help shops where folks with disabilities support other people with disabilities in order to live independently. It started with that first Berkeley Center, the mothership, and now they have them in Japan, they have them in Europe, they have them in Australia, Canada. It's not just in the United States. There's over 400 of them now, and smartly, the activists got federal funding. Not that the federal funding is adequate; they're definitely under stress right now. But there's over 400 of these centers in the United States.
Thanks, Scott. Um, One thing I came across in just reading a little bit about Ed Roberts and his work was this idea of old attitudes and old ways of thinking. And in my reading of some critical disability studies scholarship, um, and I'm looking forward to reading the book, An Independent Man, is uh, the the different models, the previous sort of what scholars have framed as models of thinking about disability. One of them is the medical model. And so, for our students who might be new to this, maybe a little bit of a run through of some of these ways of thinking might be helpful. The medical model, there's also the sort of religious or the charity model. Um, uh, and we often see the sort of inspiration model, which is maybe a little bit adjacent to them, the idea of using um, uh, outstanding or excellent athletes with disabilities as sort of inspiration for non-disabled people. Um, some of those old, the medical model, the religious model, these older ideas uh, of disability. Can you talk a little bit about those? Maybe how they can limit our thinking about disability studies, but also about the disabled community and how we might sort of move past them or break through those old attitudes.
Thanks. There's Ed had a professor, a mentor at Berkeley, a blind man who was in the faculty in poli sci, Jacobus Tenbrook, and which is a mouthful of a name. And this he was the leader of the National Federation of the for the Blind, and he was an activist before there was activism. And I recommend reading his papers. He wrote wonderful papers about how the charities, so here we're getting to the charitable model, the charities that were set up by non-disabled people to help the blind, to help the deaf, to help people with paralysis, etc. And often they used much more stigmatizing terms for these things. Um, the actual charities held people back because they framed a disempowered, inactive figure as the target for their work. And so you, as the object of charity, your job was to be jovial, cheerful, accept the pittance that they gave to you, the soup and kindness, and to be happy with it. And Tenbrook, taught Ed and others this is not enough. This is not a life. To simply be there with your hand out, waiting for someone to be nice to you. Um, so the charitable model, which, as you said, was often deeply based in religious groups and in a certain kind of American Christianity for a long time. Um, the medical model, if you think that um, the primary, well, before the 20th century, but in the 20th century, it really expands, and you get the idea that there are scientific understandings of the body that will tell us about pathology and abnormality, and that it's the the this understanding positions people with disabilities as patients, as sick. And so the primary goal is to make you well. Um, Now, one of the interesting things, to give you a story to kind of demonstrate this, when Ed Roberts and his friends, were all folks with disabilities on the campus at Berkeley, and they were housed in a campus hospital, which wasn't their first choice. It wasn't what Ed wanted. But initially, the idea was that the people who would be providing daily assistance to them would be nurses. And the problem with that is the nurses viewed them as patients who never got well. And so that's the notion, which is very, very frustrating for a nurse. Nurses go into their profession to make people get better. This is what doctors are about too. But if you're a person who doesn't get better, but they still have to care for you, that was their understanding of disability. And that's the medical model understanding, is a sick person who doesn't get well. But also, if you mentioned inclusion a few times earlier, the problem is if your model is we will help you get well, and this is a rehabilitation recovery model. If we will help you get well, and when you do, then we'll launch you into society. Then you can enter society, you can go out and get a job, then you can go to school, then you can participate in the community. But in the meantime, you're going to stay on the sideline, and we're going to keep running rehabilitation programs for you to try to get you up to snuff, to try to get you to the place you can participate. And of course, the disability rights response to that, which we often call the social model now, was let me in the game, even though this is how my body works. Let me in the game without recovery and rehabilitation. Not that someone would turn away healthcare. That's not the idea. But let me in the game even though my body works like this. Let me in the game even though my brain works like this. This is just really part of human diversity. And we have something to offer society. We have something to give. And we have a right to participate. So it's a very different understanding of the politics of participation, uh, and the role of the medical community, the role of helpers. It certainly puts, it doesn't mean people don't need help, but it certainly changes the politics of how people receive assistance.
Thank you for that, Scott. And as I expected, looking at your CV, you compressed an enormous amount of information into just a few minutes. I think and I know that you teach courses on this, but this social model of disability, the idea that a person in a wheelchair is disabled by a lack of a ramp, right? That it's the existence only of the stair, that the person is then disabled, and if the ramp is there, they are not. So disabling as a sort of transitive verb, being
You
disabled.
mentioned the attitudes. Ed was
Hmm.
worried, if you think of the other kind of ramping, which is the more complicated one, it's one thing to get in the door, it's another one to be accepted. So the ramp will help you get in the door. How can you be an equal
Hmm.
socially, politically? And that's where Ed knew that the long-term goals had to do with attitudes about what we believe about our neighbors,
I
what
want.
we believe about ourselves too. One of the interesting things I've learned, as you can tell, I'm getting older, is that it isn't an us and them game. And this is something Ed taught too. He said that disability is possibly the only minoritized group that is available to anyone and at any moment. If you're not disabled now, hopefully you live long enough that you will be. And so we're open to all of you. Please join our club. I mean, he was a bit of a wise guy, but that was the attitude is this is for all of us. This is about our bodies, and our bodies will fail us.
The universality of
Yes.
disability. And I think that that term universal comes around a few times um, with ideas like universal healthcare, but also universal design for learning specifically. We train at Cal State San Bernardino a lot of nurses and a lot of teachers. And I know that definitely teaching has been a big part of your work, disability education, but also inclusive education. Um, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about this idea within the context of what we've been discussing, universal design and universal design for learning. And I know I'm asking you to do a little bit of a remedial kind of coverage of some of these things, but I love thinking about these big ideas within the context also of your recent research and the book, and where these ideas are sitting with you right now in our current political context as well. But if you could talk a little bit about universal design and maybe considering many of our student attendees and some who are going to watch this later are going to be nurses and are especially going to be teachers.
I'll even frame it within Ed's life if I can pull that one off. Um, it was it, Ed Roberts was a teenager in the mid 50s, and he came home from the hospital, 18 months in the hospital. He was paralyzed from the neck down. He had slight movement in a couple fingers and maybe a toe. Um, and his family had an iron lung, which is an iron lung was is a giant sort of Volkswagen bug looking machine that sat in the family living room, and that facilitated breathing. He could come out of it for certain periods of time. They have other ways to help him breathe briefly. Um, but okay, so the high school was across the street. And initially, so here, even in the 1950s, they a local women's club paid for and with the local Sears Roebuck store arranged for um, a two-way communication system where Ed had a speaker and he had audio access to every one of his classrooms in the high school. And this is in the mid 1950s. And so he could tap with his toe. He had a toe he could tap with. And if he wanted to speak, he could tap his toe and he could talk. And in the classroom, they would hear his voice. It probably sounded like the movie Voice of God. But, and then the teachers would come visit about once a month to just check in with him and know a bit more about who this voice was. So even then, the goal was how can we innovate to try to provide what we can, in terms of an education. And then it wasn't long after that that his mom basically told him, "You're going across the street, whether you like it or not. We're going to wheel you over there." And that was a very frightening experience for Ed, but it worked out well. But, the universal design idea, if I can back up to that, is the idea that people, it began with notions of physical access. And so you think about even the physical environment. I look around my house. Is my house made so that everything is accessible to anyone, to all possible users, or does it have steps that go up and um, uh, bathtubs that you can't get into, or cabinets in the kitchen that are too high? I mean, the universal design begins with the idea that we've been making things for some of the people, not for all of them. And if you transfer that over to education, it's also true in education. We've tended to devise curriculum and methods for some people and not for as many as possible. And I use all in quotes because all is always a goal. Um, can we reach all? Maybe not. We can't even teach everyone to read. But we can definitely reach out and reach more people. How can we get academic ideas and content and so to a broader audience and universal design techniques? I won't go into teaching them all, but they're all about communication and representation auditorily, visually, et cetera, through many, many modalities. And I've been lucky enough to be on university committees where we have biology professors who are into universal design for learning, who say, I can use this so that more people in my Bio 101 pass and do well because I love biology so much, I want to bring it to them. Um, so that idea of opening up the world, innovating, and coming up with ways that more people can be involved instead of saying, gee, you failed because of something about you. And no, we're not going to change the way we're doing it. We've been doing it this way a long time. We're not going to change that way. We're actually going to change to improve our education system so that more people can participate. And Ed, you know, was lucky enough, even through these initial, a speaker on the wall that got him started, which was pushing the envelope in 1956.
I like this idea of the universality again, but also the sensitivity and the innovation to a specific circumstance. I like many faculty, get occasional emails that will let us know that we need to make sure that a certain course is accessible in a specific way, and I take some pride sometimes when I look at that email and say, oh, okay, I already did that. I got all this sort of check, check, check. And each time I didn't do it, I take it as an opportunity to maybe revamp an aspect of a course to say, okay, I need to do these other things and make sure that they are universally accessible. The one sort of the poster example of universal design is the curb cut. That is the sort of cut in the sidewalk that's made ostensibly for wheelchairs, but anybody who's walked on the street with an elderly family member knows that those curb cuts are not just for wheelchairs, and anybody who's pushed a stroller or carried a piano down the street, knows that those curb cuts are not just for a small segment of the population, but they make things qualitatively better for the vast majority and really for all the population. Um, and if our course is designed in a way that takes into consideration these specific things, we find indeed, like your colleague in biology, that more people are going to pass the course. Um, and the people whose grades are improved because, for example, there's a recording of the lecture or the recording is accessible, has captions or something like that. These are things um, that have a positive impact across the board and not at the expense of rigor, not but the opposite, really. So I'm really heartened by that idea as well. Uh, I want to move toward wrapping up at about the 45-minute mark, and I just want to ask Professor Danforth what is coming next, and you're so prolific in terms of your scholarship, but again also these scholarship that is enticing to the general reader. Uh, what's next?
So I will say that when this book first came out in October, and this is part of the politics of disability too, I was not able to arrange for an audio version for that I learned that in the publishing world that is a complicated thing. It's not like, oh, okay, we'll send it out to be printed up and we're gonna no, it doesn't work that way. So there are separate audio book publishers and they did not pick it up. So I took the rights back to myself and I found uh, uh, a radio announcer with a golden voice, a man from Berkeley who has a disability, so he's just the right guy. He's just wrapping up making the recorded version, and we're figuring out how to upload it to the various sites so we can, you know, and that's an accessibility thing from the very, very beginning. I knew. So the audiobook is coming very, very soon. I know a lot of people listen to audiobooks, even if it's not an issue of accessibility, they just enjoy them. So that's coming. I'll tell you the other thing I've been working on, and this is personal, and what I've learned is it's a little like what the feminists taught us about politics. It's all personal. In the midst of me working on this, 8 years, I'll tell you, it took me 8 years. Um, I discovered two things about my one child, is that my child has autism. So, and my child is transgender. So my son, who's now in his 20s, came out, as a teen as transgender. And so now I see all the links between issues facing folks with disabilities and issues facing the trans community. And of course, the fascinating thing, and it's ugly, ugly, ugly fascinating, is that you watch the administration in Washington attacks both of them. The message to the trans community and to the disability community is that you are the wrong people. We don't want you, and we need to somehow get you under our foot and squash you. And so, what have I been doing? The first thing I've done is I've been working on a memoir. And so that's another narrative format, a memoir of being a dad for a kid who was diagnosed with autism at age 16 and turned to his parents one day and said, I'm transgender. And and my wife and I looked at each other like, now what are we doing? It's and I will give you a little background on that. Just trans teenagers are 10 times more likely to end up on the streets because what happens is there are families that kick them out. And so your chances are 10 times high, 10 times higher to end up kicked out of your home. And actually, now that we're in this sort of network of parents, we got hooked up with the local parent groups. We're in with the parents of transgender youth, and these are our friends. And I know multiple families that have taken in trans young people that have been kicked out of their homes, which is just crazy. It's just craziness. Um, as a parent, ultimately, to me, it comes down to I love my child, I love my kid. And we're going to go through this. I never saw this coming, right? Wake up, you don't have a come back from the hospital and say, gee, I wonder if our child will be transgender someday. You don't uh, have those early birthday parties where they're very gender-based themes, in the early birthday parties. I don't know if you've ever been in a public place like a park and they're doing a gender reveal. And so they'll have a blue puff of smoke or a pink puff of smoke. And I'm kind of like, it may not be that way, you know?
That's great.
So that's what I'm working on right now. I only view it, interestingly enough, as just a half a step away from disability rights. I think there's already some good work about the intersection of LGBTQ and disability. Um, and this my experience and the experience of my family fits right in there. And it's all about appreciating human beings the way they come
Mm.
in the forms that we come. We come in all sizes and shapes, and how can we live together? So that's what I'm working on right now.
Thank you for that, Scott. That's a really wonderful note to wrap up on, just the on these themes of universality, of inclusion, empowerment, and what that looks like and what that experience is, from a parent, from a scholar, from a member of these communities. Um, these are really, I think, urgent times for having these kinds of conversations, and for saying out loud the things that need to be said, the things that need to be heard. Um, and and this is a great time to for us to hear from you, I think, from Professor Scot Danforth, but also to learn about Ed Roberts and the fight, of his work for disability rights. These are um, are extended, long conversations. We do have to wrap up, but it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to be in community here with you all who joined, and uh, with Professor Danforth, with Scott. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to following your work.
It's been a joy. I've been thrilled to be with you. I appreciate you having this conversation. And I thank you to everyone out there.
Thanks. And we got some applause, as especially in this these last few remarks from Trisha and everybody else. Thank you very much,
All right,
Scott.
thanks.